Hey friends, finally getting this video out to you, but it'll be pretty brief because the tasks for this upcoming Saturday are pretty straightforward, pretty simple. And hopefully if you've had a chance to look at the reading, you'll have figured out that that is the case. Because what we need you to do between now and Saturday is to make a list of all the groups that meet in your church. Now, you may already actually have this existing as part of your annual report or some other document that your church generates on a regular basis about your ministry. But one of the things that I want to kind of highlight is that what we're talking about is not just the groups that count as quote unquote small groups, like Bible studies or support groups or fellowship groups or discipleship groups, which have often kind of fallen under an umbrella of small group ministry or various kinds of group ministry. But also all the committees and all the other gatherings of any sort that take place at your church. And why are we doing this, right? Is everything a significant relational group? Well, we'll talk more about this, but one of the things that we have found was a less than adequate aspect of the previous materials we created, and so you'll notice this as you're reading the book that you have or will have in the next few days, is that those materials were really created thinking of significant relational groups or small groups as part of the ministry pie. That is, so hopefully you can all see this. We've got a circle here. If your ministry is like a pie graph, right, of all the things that happen, and like a big piece of it is worship, okay, and then you have youth, and you have what we usually call at our church spiritual life, okay, and then outreach, right, and then various kinds of service within the church, okay? So, like, if your church's ministry pie graph is kind of like that, the previous way of thinking about it is that there would be a chunk of this graph that was small groups, okay? What turned out to be the case is that things function best if you've got a pie graph of all the things your church does, and none of them is actually small groups. Because the way that churches are most vital is if groups, significant relational groups, are not a thing that they do. That is, they're not a piece of this pie, but they are the way they do things. That is, all these pieces of ministry have at their core, at their foundation, as their way of functioning, significant relational groups. So our little tagline that we came up with a few years ago as we were re-envisioning these processes and materials was, significant relational groups are not a thing we do, they're the way we do things. And so this is a huge change. This is a paradigm shift for almost all churches, and really for folks who think about this in general, like the place and the function of groups within church culture. So what we really want y'all to do is write down every group that meets at your church, whether it counts itself as a small group or might be thought of as a small group, or is a group that just gets together. So I, in fact, a colleague at a different church the other day, in work unrelated to what this is, shared with me the list of all the ministries that go on at their church. And I found it was really helpful because this is exactly the kind of list that I hope you all can generate. And now I had to take a picture of it and then flip it and then print it. So it's a little hard to see, but we're gonna get it in here. So some of the things are groups that are sort of typically understood as small groups or significant relational groups. Care groups, the confirmation class, Bible study groups, some of these other groups. But there's a lot of things on here, especially in the service area, that are really small groups or significant relational groups, or can function as significant relational groups, but they're not usually thought of that way. And at the bottom here, at the bottom here, these ministries that he listed that are not in their brochure, as he is saying there, all of those are potential areas where the church could really be vitalized and people could really grow in their discipleship and in their capacity to serve and grow in their faith life if these were envisioned as significant relational groups. And we'll talk about how to do that. But the very first step is just to get sort of the lay of the land, get what the what the landscape is of all the gatherings that are going on at your church, and then think about, as you saw in the readings for Saturday, where do they fit in the four types? Because this is the other piece that has been kind of typical of previous work in churches around groups, is that they think of significant relational groups or of small groups as particularly one type, like they're either mainly just discipleship groups, Bible study groups, prayer groups, but have not had a very holistic picture of the groups that either are taking place or that could take place and that could really be places of deep growth for the folks who participate in that. And so, as you'll see or have seen in the materials, there are four types of groups, essentially. There are study groups or learning groups. There are caring groups. There are working groups. And there are being together groups. Okay, so study or learning, pretty straightforward. It's a group that mostly focuses on learning something together. Okay, caring groups, I almost didn't send you all the scans of that section because I don't think that's a very good description really of caring groups in retrospect, looking back on them. But any group where the main function is that people get together and care for one another. So this could be a grief support group, really any kinds of support groups. It could also be a prayer group, any kind of pastoral care where people are really helping each other and supporting each other through whatever. So caring groups. Task-oriented groups or working together groups. There's lots of those in the church, and these are going to attract a certain kind of people that are maybe not attracted to a learning group or a caring group. But this can be a space where those folks can really have their discipleship enriched and deepened if they're conceived of as a significant relational group. So all the committees, all the task-oriented groups, all the working groups, all the serving groups, those should go on your list. And then being together groups. That's recreational groups, the groups that just get together because they enjoy doing a thing. Could be a dinner group, could be softball, could be our church actually about a year and a half ago started a Friday afternoon bridge group that I will just say has been one of the great success stories as an example of how a group that starts out being fairly light, fairly low key. Nobody was asking for professions of faith or expecting folks to dig in deeply and share. But as they met week after week, what ended up happening was they built community. And when it turned out that someone in the group was facing a medical crisis and a related housing crisis, everybody in that group came together to make sure that that person was cared for spiritually and also supported in practical ways, to the point that the pastoral staff at the church didn't even find out about the need until after the fact, when someone said, oh yeah, this person had this need, and we took care of it. I mean, that is an amazing story. Not every group will have that level of transformation, but it can happen. So, learning, caring, working, and being. Now, no group is going to be just one thing, and it should not be that way. Every group needs to build relationships. So every group needs to spend some time doing just the being together part, right? We've got to build relationships no matter what our other tasks are. So as you're thinking about these groups and you're making your list and trying to say, is this a study group? Is this a care group? They pray, but they also do some learning. They get together, but they also do work. It's kind of a both and. It's okay if it's not clear that it's just one thing. It should not be just one thing. And you can think of this, again, I'm a fan of pie graphs, I'm visual. So like a few years ago, we started a spiritual discernment group, and I lead this group. And when I started, I really thought we were going to do prayer and study. And I had all these very detailed plans of how each session was going to go and all the things we were going to do. And what happened, of course, was the Holy Spirit just had a different idea. And what it turned out people needed was just to be with each other for a while, to talk about what questions they had, what wonderings they had about the direction that God was leading them. And for about a year and a half, that group was mainly a being together and a caring together group. That is, we'd come in, share about what's been going on with ourselves in the last couple weeks, where we're at. We'd pray for each other, we'd support each other, but we did very little learning and very little what we might call skill building, like learning spiritual practices or things like that. It's only in the last few months that folks have finally gotten to the place where if we did this pie graph, they now want to spend, a big chunk of time doing some learning, Bible study. They want to learn some spiritual contemplative prayer practices while still spending time praying for each other and supporting each other and just sharing about their lives. and being together and laughing and talking about how their week went. And that's okay. Groups are going to change and grow over their lifespan, and that's okay. We'll talk more about all this as we get together. But the thing I really want to emphasize in this is if you can make your list and just begin thinking about what kind of groups are these, what's happening in our church, what kind of groups do we have, what does our list look like? Does it, mostly look like a certain kind of group? And then we'll start talking about how do we utilize some of the tools at our disposal to help really build congregational vitality that then grows into the kind of vitality that produces growth and health for your congregation on various levels, and how groups and having a mindset of significant relational groups as your way of being together can really transform the ministries that are happening within your church. And like I said, we will talk more about that on Saturday. I look forward to being with you all and having that conversation. Have a good night.